Bonjour, hi, welcome, bienvenue. In today's video we'll be talking about two places in Paris sitting a few blocks apart that everybody walks by without paying attention. No line, no crowds, no souvenir stands outside, and yet inside you will have the intimate version of Paris. For the purpose of this video I revisited these two tiny museums this morning, and one of them talks about George Sand, a French writer, which history I find fascinating. Here we are in the 9th arrondissement, the Moulin Rouge neighborhood, and it was once called La Nouvelle Athènes, New Athens. This neighborhood in the 1800s was the beating heart of a very new artistic movement called le Romanticism. And I will show you today these two museums as they still hold that spirit. One is le Musée de la Vie Romantique and the other one is le Musée Gustave Moreau. Just to give you a little bit of context, La Nouvelle Athènes, the New Athens, was developed in the early 19th century as a place for artists, composers, painters, writers. It was the equivalent of what Montparnasse would be a century later. The Romantic movement was not just about love, it was a philosophical revolution. It was a rejection of cold Enlightenment rationalism. So the Romantic movement was all in favor of emotion, imagination, the sublime, the spiritual. It was all about feeling things deeply in art, in music, in literature. When you enter le Musée de la Vie Romantique, you turn off the street into a small cobblestone passage and the city is just disappearing. You suddenly arrive in a private garden. It's very charming. There is a little rose garden, a greenhouse, a tea room, and most of all it's very quiet. So this building was an 1830s Hôtel Particulier. It has been renovated and opened on the Valentine's Day 2026. This house belonged to Ary Scheffer. He was born in the Netherlands and he moved to Paris young, trained as a painter and became one of the most admired artists of the Romantic era. But more than his art, what defined Scheffer was his house. He built two studios in this building, one for working and one for receiving guests. And every Friday night he opened his doors. He was hosting and his hosts were Frédéric Chopin, Franz Liszt, George Sand, Eugène Delacroix, and so on. That's why this museum also dedicates a room to George Sand, as she was one of a kind. She was born in 1804 and her real name was Aurore Dupin. She was married to a baron and as soon as her late 20s she was done with this story and she left him to go to Paris. Then she started to write novels under the pen name of a male name, George Sand. Because the literary world of the 1830s was not exactly throwing open its doors for women. So she wore trousers, she smoked cigars in public, and she walked the streets of Paris at night dressed as a man, which gave her access to places no woman of her class was supposed to go. And she wrote and she wrote and she wrote constantly at least 70 novels and way more other works. At a time when Victor Hugo and Balzac were very famous in France, George Sand was very famous in England. Of course, her love life was very scandalous. For more than 10 years, she had a relationship with Frédéric Chopin, and their letters are one of the most famous letters in the French literature. There is also her jewelry, intimate personal pieces, her portraits, her letters, a plaster of her hand. So here the visit is organized around two themes. The ground floor is dedicated to La Vie Romantique, the social life, friendships, the circle around Ary Scheffer, the world of Chopin and Sand and Delacroix. Upstairs you move through four great themes of Romanticism itself: nature, landscape, feeling, literature and the fantastical. And then, after a 6 minutes walk, you can enter le Musée Gustave Moreau. The Musée Gustave Moreau is very fascinating, as you will discover a very famous painter studio. Back then, he was even a teacher. The museum sits in a rather very classical Parisian townhouse, and it's old. The apartment he lived in is old, it smells old, everything is like cracking, the floor is cracking. It's, we would say in French, dans son jus, in its juice. Gustave Moreau was born in Paris in 1826 to a cultural upper middle class family. His father was an architect, his mother a musician, and he trained at l'École des Beaux-Arts. He had a breakthrough at the Paris Salon in 1864 with a painting called Oedipus and the Sphinx, and he spent the rest of his life developing one of the most singular visions in the history of French painting. He was a symbolist, which means he was painting ideas, not just scenes. His canvases are layered with meaning, with allegory, with a kind of hallucinatory beauty that can feel almost too much for the eyes. Gustave Moreau did not just leave his work to history, he designed the museum himself. Starting in 1895, 3 years before his death, he asked an architect to transform his family home into a museum. He spent years arranging his paintings, his drawings, his studies, his watercolors, organizing them himself so that the viewers would understand the full scope of his work, his process, his obsessions, his development as an artist. So as I said, he was also a teacher, a beloved teacher, and his students at l'École des Beaux-Arts included Henri Matisse and Georges Rouault, who went on to become the museum's first curator. So Moreau gave the next generation of modern art its foundation. In a very real sense, Fauvism and modern painting passed through this house. So these two museums are in the same neighborhood and they both exist because of the same Romantic era. Et voilà, c'est tout pour aujourd'hui. Thank you for watching. Have a great day! Et voilà, c'est tout pour aujourd'hui. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.